Well, thank you, Rachel. Um, as we do each week, as we have done all year through our webinar series, we're just going to wait a few minutes while everyone who's registered for today's webinar signs in. We're very fortunate today to have Suellen Tomkins with us, who's the owner of the lovely Helia 44 Wild Heart, which is pictured there. I'm pretty certain that's lying in Turkey. Is that right, Suellen?
It's the Montenegro.
Ah, Montenegro, beautiful. And so, as I say, we'll just sit and wait for a couple of minutes until we have all our registered participants join us. And as we do each week, this is the last of our webinars for 2020. I think Rachel's in the background. I think it must be up around number 20. Is that right? I think so. So we've got a break, and then we will continue the webinar series. Oh, there you go. 21 is the number of webinars we've done this year. And then early next year, we'll, at the end of January, we'll keep the webinars going because they have proven to be quite successful. And we've had a real variety of topics. We've had walkthroughs of certain yachts. We've had first aid webinars. We've talked about locations, cruising, whether it be the Southwest Pacific or the Mediterranean, as examples. And then also the topic today of liveaboard cruising tips. And I've been fortunate enough to have done a rehearsal with Suellen for this webinar yesterday. And the content today, I think, is fantastic for anyone who's looking to move aboard and live aboard a cruising yacht, whether that be here in Australia where we are, or whether it be anywhere in the world. And a popular thing for a lot of our clients at Multihull Solutions is to move aboard and live aboard in the Mediterranean, and then from there the Caribbean and so on. So a very useful topic for today. So Suellen, you're in control of the slides there. If we might just drop through to the next slide. And while we're doing that, hello to you.
Oh, hello. Hello, Craig.
So where are you sitting and talking to us from today, Suellen?
Just outside, just actually in our lounge room at Lake Macquarie.
Beautiful. And I think you said yesterday you've actually got your Helia that's pictured there in Montenegro. It is here in Australia, so you've got it here on Lake Macquarie.
Yep, it's moored just outside the house, which is really nice.
Okay, so there on that second slide is the next webinar. So to start 2021 off, we're going to be doing a live walkthrough of the Allegria 67 that recently arrived in Phuket. So our team up there in Thailand will be working with us to host a walkthrough of the Allegria 67, which is the largest flagship of the Fountaine Pajot fleet. And then on the 25th of February, we'll also be doing a walkthrough of the MY40 power catamaran. And that will be one that has just recently arrived. I think we're going to do it with the one that's just recently arrived off a ship and is now on the Gold Coast. We're now lucky to have MY40s on the Gold Coast and soon to be Sydney. So it's good to have more of the MY powerboat range here in Australia. And as we always say each week, if you do want to go back and watch any of our previous webinars, you can do that by clicking on our Multihull Solutions YouTube channel. If you click onto Multihull Solutions on YouTube, you'll find all of this year's series are there for you to rewatch it anytime you like. So if we might just click through to the next slide again. A bit of housekeeping as we do each week. We welcome, and really what makes these webinars work is your questions. So if anyone has any questions, please type them and in the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. Depending on what the relevance of the question to where we are in the presentation, or whether it's more generalistic, we'll make a decision whether to answer it immediately or we'll hold it over for a Q&A session at the end. Now, some of our webinars in the last few months have gone quite long. I can tell you today will not be that, and I'm not saying that's because it's not good content, it's just because Suellen's done such a good job of putting together the presentation. So today, I do believe we'll probably be able to work through this presentation today and be finished within around about an hour. So again, if we could move forward, and as we say, we welcome your questions. As we do each week, my name is Greg Boller. I'm the new yacht sales manager here at Multihull Solutions, and behind the scenes, as always, is Rachel Crook, the marketing manager. And if we flick over to the next page, and this is where we will formally hand over to you, Suellen, and let you start the presentation. And I'm going to turn my camera off, and we'll just let you be the host of the day.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Rachel. I just firstly want to thank Multihull Solutions and the Yacht Sales Co for inviting me to give this seminar and just sharing some of my experiences of life on board a yacht. I have found personally it's a really rewarding way to live. You're very much in touch with nature. It's a more simple lifestyle. But it's not like living in a house. So there's certain things that you've kind of got to think about and consider. So what I'm hoping to share with you today is just some of my personal experience and also some things that you might want to consider in the way of various topics and categories. So we can't go obviously too in depth today, but it's more like an overview of all the things that you might want to consider while you're getting ready to live on board. So just a little bit of background about my cruising history, I guess. I've mostly done it two-handed with my husband, Scott. You can see in the top photograph. I think that photograph was taken when we were on our first day out, leaving Lake Macquarie to go to the Whitsundays. And I think you can see by the smiles on our faces just how happy we were to be out there. It was a beautiful day. We had dolphins, we had bird life. It was just a terrific way to start. The photo underneath is of me actually sailing around Tahiti, and I did a passage from Tahiti to the Cook Islands, which was crewed. So Scott and I have done a lot of chartering, usually about 10 days to 2 weeks at a time. We've chartered in Thailand, Croatia a couple of times because it's just simply beautiful. The Whitsundays, and also to Tonga, which was absolutely magical as well. And as I said, I did a crewed passage from Tahiti to the Cook Islands. We've cruised in our monohull as well as our current boat now, as Greg mentioned, excuse me, is the multi-hull, the Helia 44 Wild Heart. So in Wild Heart, we actually picked the boat up, as Greg mentioned again, at the factory in France, and we sailed the boat to Croatia. So we went down the Atlantic coast, past Spain and into the Mediterranean, and then across the Balearics into Italy and where else did we go? Italy and over towards Croatia.
And I think you might have noticed, Suellen, earlier in the season, we've had John from Down Under Sailing, and he starts his webinars with a classic comment. That is, if you're going to do this, don't take advice from someone who hasn't done it. So it's nice that we've got you today because clearly you've done a lot of sailing.
Yeah, yeah. And in a monohull and a catamaran too, and they're both a little bit different. Having said that, I think the comfort level on a catamaran was pretty high, really. It was a really comfortable way to spend 6 months on a boat. So where I'm taking this presentation is, I guess I'm taking it from where you've got all your boat and all your safety preparations, they're all done. And now it's more about what is it going to be like living on board. So that's where I'm going to start this presentation. So some of the topics that I'm going to cover today is really how you work with your yacht and your home as your home, but also your means of travel. Weather and destination planning become extremely important, especially the weather, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how we manage that. Also, communication on board becomes important. If you're spending 24/7 with somebody or a group of people, you need to understand just how to navigate things. Formalities like customs and immigration also become important if you're moving from country to country. So I'm trying to cover off things here that could pertain to Australia and also could pertain to Europe. So if anybody has specific questions about either destination, please just let us know. Also, a little bit about food and provisioning. What I've found has been convenient and helpful to us. Health and exercise, which is often overlooked, and I know we made that mistake during our first cruising season. How you might entertain yourselves on board, and also a little bit about tourism as well, and the importance of incorporating that into your cruise.
Very good.
All right, so the first thing is, I guess your yacht will be your home and your means of transport. So our number one rule on our boat was always the yacht and its safety always comes first, because the yacht being safe means you're safe. So it means ensuring that the boat is safe and secure before leaving it at any time. And I can't stress this enough. I've seen people leave the boat when the wind in Anchorage is blowing 30+ knots, and they're off having touring for the day or having coffee. And in Europe in particular, it gets very crowded and you can't guarantee how well other people have anchored. So it's really important that you just watch the weather, watch your neighboring boats and understand what's happening, because you don't want to come back to something that's not so great, really. And we've seen as many people who sail have yachts drag all the time, particularly in bad weather or in anchorages that don't have good holding. Unexpected things can happen no matter how well you prepare or take safety precautions. So flexibility is always the key.
So Suellen, just a question, just going back to that previous point. I think you mentioned yesterday that you spent quite a lot of time actually anchored out or on moorings because the marinas are quite expensive in the high season. What percentage of your time in cruising were you at anchor, and what percentage were you on moorings?
That's a good question, Greg. I'd like to say 70-30, I think. Just
70% on anchor?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we would go into a marina if we needed a break, if we were picking up guests, if we needed to do some shopping, or if we felt the weather was going to be particularly bad and we just wanted to be in a safe place, we'd go into marina. But the Helia being so self-sufficient, with plenty of water on board, plenty of food storage on board, and we had a water maker as well as a gen set, it meant that we're pretty much self-sufficient. So we could choose to flex that as we like. But I think 70-30 would be a fair estimate.
Yeah, that's good. And that all plays into your point one.
Yeah.
Which is the yacht safety first.
Yeah. The other thing you need to think about is avoiding the pressure of a timetable or a fixed itinerary. If you have a fixed itinerary or the pressure of a timetable, you can get a little bit caught out making decisions that maybe aren't in the best interest of your boat or yourselves. If you're tired or if the weather's not looking very good, but your guests have to be in a particular place at a particular time, it puts an awful lot of pressure on you and the crew. So if you can, I'd avoid it. And I think there's a saying that goes, if you have guests on board, they can choose where they arrive or when they arrive, but they can't choose both, or something like that. So we've had guests arrive in one place and we've dropped them somewhere else where they had to take a taxi to the nearest airport because the weather wasn't looking particularly good to be in the chosen anchorage, the ideal anchorage. So you've just got to be a little bit flexible. And as to Greg's point earlier, it's important that you do take a break from the boat from time to time, because it can be a little stressful worrying about your anchorage and your holding and other boats and things like that. So sometimes just paying the price of being in a marina just gives you the time to sort of breathe, go for a walk, not worry about the boat, know that it's being safely tied up and it's secure. So I'd certainly consider that in your planning as well. So weather and destination planning. So Scott would accuse me of being a little bit weather obsessed, and I guess I was, because watching the weather becomes it's just very important when you're on a boat, and you don't want to make the experience unpleasant or uncomfortable by not checking the weather. So knowing what the weather's going to do, whatever weather planning software you choose, but I'll explain a little bit about what we choose to use. And also it's important to check VHF and check the local weather forecast. So we did actually get caught out in Croatia in a squall because we didn't realize that the weather from north to south in Croatia varies a lot. So listening to the local area weather forecast becomes extremely important. So I would certainly, well, after that, I added that to my routine.
And again, Suellen, yesterday I asked you that question about who was who on the boat with the two, you and Scott. But coming to that, you obviously took on a lot of the weather study. Was that a large learning curve for you, or is it something you'd always been involved in, or was it suddenly because you were thrust into living on a boat that it became something you had to start learning quickly?
No, it was a learning curve, and so the weather software that we chose to use was Predict Wind, and they have different subscription models. And if you're doing passage planning, it's reasonably costly, but I felt that it was a worthwhile investment in just knowing what we were going into. And in hindsight, when I think back, most of the weather situations were pretty well predicted by us except for the squall, and we avoided any other nasty situations. If we knew it was coming, we were well prepared. So Predict Wind, the reason why I mentioned it is Predict Wind actually do have a lot of guides and resources, and I believe they were running webinars as well, just running through the model or their software. It's becoming more and more complex. So it's important that you do actually take the time to learn what you're looking at.
Yes.
So if we just look at the useful apps for weather, as I mentioned, so Predict Wind I use for weather forecasting, Predict Wind Offshore we use for passage planning, which shows you weather are much further offshore, and you can actually plan your routes and plan your waypoints. Windy, I believe some people use. I used to use that as a double check, but I found it was just information overload and I stopped. But it does have a free, does have free software, so some people do use it. And then in Europe, we used Navily for anchoring because it's a bit like a TripAdvisor for anchorages. Various people will go to an anchorage, they'll rate it based on holding or access to shops or whatever it is. So they give it a rating. So sometimes all the anchorages are not available to you in your cruising or your pilot guides. And Navily just gives you additional options you can check. But because it's used mainly by Europeans, they do Google Translate the comments. So the comments can be pretty hilarious sometimes, but it's worthwhile looking at. For an anchor alarm, we use Anchor, which is pretty straightforward. You just set it when you're dropping your anchor, and then you can set the perimeter depending on what your scope of your anchor is. We tried Nebo, which is a digital logging device. I quite liked it, but we tried it very late in our trip. So what it does is it actually logs your trip. You can add comments to it, and then it emails you the soft copy of your actual trip. So it's quite a convenient way, if you like tech, of keeping a log of your passages. The other app we used was Marine Traffic, and we found that this was just a good way really of keeping track of friends or people that we met on boats and just seeing where their boats were. So that's quite a nice one too.
And then over on the left-hand side there, you've mentioned destination planning and also the pilots and cruising guides, yeah?
Yeah. So, so with the destination planning, as I said, don't be too rigid and be guided very much by weather conditions, and also advice from other cruisers about the best anchorages and destinations can be useful as well. And things like pilot guides, cruising guides, and charts are invaluable. And one thing I would say to anybody is please think about buying these before you actually leave your home country, because they're actually not that easy to get when you're traveling, particularly in Europe. We didn't find them very easy to get at all. Luckily, we had a bunch on board, but when we were looking for ones for, say, the next countries, we may have to order them or wait, and you might not want to be in that place for that long. So make sure you have those on board when you're ready to go. They are heavy, but it is worth the effort.
Very good.
So a little bit about just communication on the boat. It's obviously really important for people to stay in touch with friends and family. From a yacht safety perspective, you want your VHF radio, SSB if you've got it, although it doesn't seem to be as common these days. We did have it on our monohull and we found we hardly ever used it. We did use Iridium Go in Europe and found that really useful for messages and email, so long as people don't attach an enormous photograph or pictures or something like that, because then it just takes too long to download. Well, you can't download it, the files will be too big. So that was good to have as well. If you can afford it, a sat phone, but we didn't use the sat phone, but some people do, depending on where they're going. And make sure somebody on board has a radio license as well. That's important. And also, you know, there's different ways of using your phone while you're abroad. We actually had a mobile broadband modem, like one of those mini ones on board. And then we just bought data cards when we were in various countries. So that was great for downloading email and internet and weather when you were, had good access to Wi-Fi. So the thing about the SIM cards is they vary from country to country. So some countries like Montenegro, it was really great, very cheap, very good service. Whereas places like France, it was unreliable, and Italy, they were just difficult to come by. So again, you just have to be a bit flexible and always plan to have sort of backups. If you can't get your SIM, you might be using your Iridium Go for things. So.
Very good.
All right. So communication, not only from the boat or to the boat, but also between couples and crew. As I said, you're spending 24 hours a day together, pretty much. And so you have to sort of navigate the relationships, not only between couples, but crew as well on board. So a good thing to do is agree on roles and responsibilities up front, whether it's between you and your partner or you and other crew members. It's good to have, you know, people know their role and people aren't doubling up, and people don't double up, then things might not get missed. So yeah, make sure that your roles and responsibilities are really clear. And also don't split the roles. This is the message for couples. By gender, you know, that I would suggest you look at splitting roles based on your skill set and your capabilities. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm a lot better at tech than, say, Scott is. So I would do the weather, I would do the navigation, I would do the passage planning, I would look after the Iridium Go and a lot of things like that, as well as the Galley. Scott would do a lot around the sail management, sail setting, the mechanical work. And the year we were in the Med, he did most of the helming, but when we were in the Sundays on our mono, I'd do most of the helming. But the thing we made sure we both could do is that we would split roles, or we could each do the other person's role. And the way we looked upon that is if there was an accident or an emergency, you have to be able to step up to a certain level. So it might not mean that I can fix the engine, but I might know enough about how to maintain the engine if I had to. So it's really important that you can split both roles. But what I did find was that having a routine on board actually made things go a lot quicker. So when we were anchoring, Scott would helm, he'd choose the anchorage, I would drop the anchor and I would lift the anchor. when we were leaving, and that just worked really well for us. But we knew that if we had to, we could flip the other way around.
And Suellen, a question without notice,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's important. This is about liveaboard cruising, and you're living aboard. It's your home. Did you have visitors come on board very often to then make your two-person activity a group activity?
We did have visitors on board, usually for short periods of time, usually not much longer than 2 weeks. And when we did have visitors on board, there were people who knew what they were doing around the boat, or they were willing to learn. And just having even one extra person on board just made a huge difference in managing the boat, particularly if you were berthing in a marina. Just having an extra pair of hands was great.
And when they came aboard each time, as again they're coming into your home, your liveaboard home, did you then obviously go through a fairly detailed briefing with them when they came on?
Yeah, so we'd always do a safety briefing with them, you know, where the fire extinguishers were, where the life jackets were, the things that they needed to watch out for, be careful of. Yeah, we made sure we did that. And the other thing that may have been covered in the marine first aid course is that it's important as well that you understand maybe some of the medication that people are taking when they come on board, in case there is a medical emergency and you need to assist them in some way. So
that's been a commonly made point in about 3 or 4 of our webinars this year from different topics about if someone comes on board your boat, know what each other's medications or medical conditions are. So it's obviously a very important point.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's all right. Question? The other thing that Scott and I agreed on early on after advice from friends, that save any disagreements you have after you're safely berthed or anchored. Berthing and anchoring can sometimes be a little bit stressful, particularly berthing, and there's just no point having an argument while you're in the middle of things. You just got to get it done and then deal with it later. So that was an important piece of advice from friends, actually. And the other thing I'd suggest as well is consider investing in a two-way radio system for anchoring and berthing, like you can see in the photograph below. We decided we would get these when we saw a couple in Europe we became friendly with when we were actually chartering in Croatia, where we followed them into an anchorage because we were joining them for dinner, and we watched them with these headsets on just look really cool and calm and collected anchoring. And they gave us inspiration to get these two-way radio systems. And when we got the Helia, we bought the Sennas, Senna SPH10s, and we found that they were great in high wind conditions. You can hear each other, you're not shouting, and that's particularly important to just reduce any stress that you might have on the boat in kind of tight situations or difficult situations. So,
and as I asked yesterday, you don't have to use a hand or a finger to press a button to talk. It's just automatic.
Yep. So you press a button to turn it on, they pair to each other, and then you were hands-free. That was one of our criteria for getting any of this. There's a lot of two-way radio systems where you have to actually press a button. And you know, when you're busy doing stuff around the boat, that's just not practical. So that's why we went with these. They're completely hands-free.
Very good.
All right, a little bit about customs and immigration. I guess this is more for Europe than it is here. But number one thing is obviously your passports. And we kept copies in another place in case we ever needed them. And Greg asked me yesterday what we did for document security, things like passports. We actually bought a safe from a hardware store in Europe, and we had it bolted into our boat so that we knew we could lock up things like our passports, our boat documents and things like that. Is that going to stop somebody who really wants to come on your boat and reef it out? Probably not, but we felt a lot more secure knowing that we at least had them locked up out of the way, and it was just more difficult for somebody to get to. The other thing you're going to need, as I mentioned, is the boat ownership and registration documents. If you're overseas, you probably have, and it's an Australian registered boat, you're going to have a certificate of registration from AMSA. You need to keep that with you all the time. The marinas will want that. They'll take copies, as well as your boat insurance and your certificate of currency. So
and just to interrupt there, on that boat ownership, doesn't matter where your yacht is registered, but it would need to be the paperwork or certificate of registration from your the jurisdiction that your boat is registered in.
Yeah, and that's important in Australia as well. They will ask you before you book into a marina, what's your insurance status. The other one that sounds like a funny one is a boat stamp. So again, we had some friends advise us to get a boat stamp. They'd sailed around the world and they found that it came in really useful. So I thought, oh, well, I'm preparing to get ready to go on the boat. I'll order a boat stamp. And luckily, the place that we needed it was actually Montenegro to get tax-free fuel. You cannot go anywhere without a boat stamp. So it saved us a lot of time and trouble, because we've heard people running around trying to look for people to get stamps made for their boat, whereas we had one that was ready to go. So that saved us quite a bit of time.
I'm sure there's a few people watching this today who just, if they take nothing else away from this, they're going out to get a stamp made.
Country flags you'll need when you check into a country, as well as a Q flag. So as you're checking into a country, you will fly your Q flag to say you haven't passed. You're still waiting for clearance from customs and quarantine. Once you pass those formalities, then you can fly the country flag. It's a courtesy, but it's good practice for people to do. And what I'd suggest is that, again, like the cruising guides and the pilot guides, that you buy these country flags from home. Again, it'll just save you so much time and looking around. Somewhere like France, if you're picking up your boat there, they have great chandleries in La Rochelle, but in some other places that you might be going to, the chandleries are often quite small and they don't stock everything that you may need. So make sure you're pretty well stocked up and don't rely on the small chandleries on your way. And if you have got any pets on board, which we didn't at the time, but we would now, it's please make yourself familiar with the pet rules and regulations while you're overseas. I can't offer any guidance on that as yet, but I know that people we'd met from the UK actually had passports for their pets while they were in Europe. So it's something that you just have to factor into your planning.
Very good.
Provisioning, food. So how much you provision for and how you provision depends very much on your plans. If you're going on a short trip or you're not going to be living on board for very long, then you won't have to plan for as much. If you're in Europe, food is pretty easy to get in most places, but we found that we didn't necessarily want to spend all our free time in a marina or in an anchorage looking for food and going shopping. It's, as you know, you may know that getting food on and off a boat is not always that convenient. One thing we did do, which we found really, really useful, was to get ourselves what I call a nana trolley. So those wheeler-long trolleys that could collapse, was brilliant to take to the supermarkets or to markets. It just made it so much easier to carry the food to and from the boat. So prioritize easy to prepare or convenient food for the first few days of passage until you settle into a routine. You might feel a little queasy or a little seasick, or you might just not be up to preparing like full-on meals. So give yourself a break and just have things ready to go, like cheese and crackers or canned soups or cup of soups, just something that's just really light and easy to prepare. So for the first few days, if you're prone to being a little bit queasy, no heavy meals, just keep the meals really light and pretty dry. Stock up on dry goods like there's staples. So things like rice, canned and dried beans, those sorts of things, quinoa, all those sorts of dry things that may be useful just to supplement your meals. And stock up on product substitutes that you may not normally eat. So things like cake mixes, dried milk, dried yogurt mixes, UHT milk, canned foods, that sort of stuff that you may find you might want to use. You might want to bake a cake, but you don't want to, don't have all the ingredients. It's nice to just have some of those things to hand. And the more you carry initially, the less you'll have to shop as you go along. So if you have all those dried staples and those dry goods, you can actually focus on fresh foods while you're out. So it limits the amount of shopping that you actually have to do. And obviously there's always the chance of fresh fish if you've got some fishing gear on board too. And we did, I was telling the story yesterday, the one and only fish we caught was going from, I think, Menorca to Sardinia. And Scott, on his fourth throw, I think, caught an enormous tuna that we took an hour and a half to clean up the aftermath of it. But it was a lot of fun catching that fish.
So yeah, and so Gordon and Louise on their webinar, they also talked about the couple of fish they caught, and it was also a topic of discussion. It was fun to catch the fish, but not very nice on the teak.
No. A few suggestions for the galley, just quick handy suggestions is you can get yogurt makers and powdered yogurt, and that'll alleviate having to look for things like yogurt if that's the sort of thing you like having on board. When we went to the Whitsundays, because food's not as easy to get as in Europe, although it obviously is easy, but we were just stocked up, is this vacuum food preparation machine. So anytime we picked up fresh food, we would get them to either vacuum pack if the butchers would do that, or I would vacuum pack the food when we got it on board. And it just keeps it longer. Again, it just means you don't have to shop as frequently. On the Helia, we chose to have a microwave, which we ummed and ahed over, and we found it quite useful for those really quick meals when we were anchoring late and we just wanted something warm and quick to go. The microwave is really handy. And something that we discussed yesterday, which I hadn't used, but I thought it might be worth throwing in here, is this thermal cookware, this thing called a shuttle chef. And what it is it's a insulated container, I guess. So the idea is you prepare your stew or your curry or whatever on your gas stove or your whatever stove you've got, bring it up to temperature, pour it into this shuttle chef, which doesn't require any electricity. And you literally leave it for about 6 to 8 hours. And at the end of the day, when you're ready to eat a meal, your food should be well and truly cooked. So it's another way of slow cooking. So
it's just a large thermos.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And listen, we've got a question from one of the people who are watching with us today. Did you use a pressure cooker at all?
No. I have a pressure cooker at home, but we chose not to have one on the boat. It's not something that I really wanted to have on the boat. And having used one at home, it can take a while to come up to temperature. So all the while you're doing that much cooking, you're consuming gas. So that's a stovetop one. I don't have that much experience with a electric one.
Understood.
Collapsible silicone bowls and nested pans are great space savers as well. And we found some great nested pans from Tiefel where the handles came off. So they were really easy to store, and they were quite cost effective as well. And we did put a sandwich maker on board, which is actually quite handy for those quick meals that I was talking about.
And just while you're there, so folks, if you are watching and you want to ask any questions, don't forget just to click on the Q&A box at the bottom there. So if you've got any questions relative to what we've already covered or anything that we haven't yet touched on, just type it in. Thank you. Thanks, Suellen.
Okay, now we'll cover a little bit about health and exercise. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, this was something that wasn't so much on our radar on our first cruise. And we actually found ourselves quite out of shape by the time we got off the boat. So we were a lot more conscious about it when we were doing other cruises. So just some suggestions of activities that are pretty easy to do on a boat. So swimming as often as possible, laps around the boat if you're not comfortable swimming too far away from the boat, obviously. Walking as often as you can by taking a dinghy ashore. Simple yoga exercises are really good for maintaining flexibility and getting rid of all those aches and pains you tend to get on a boat. We actually did have a stand-up paddleboard on board. We still do on board Wild Heart, and we found that great. Not only was it great exercise, but it was a great way to explore the anchorage as well. And you can always choose to paddle that ashore for your walk. It's another way of getting there instead of using the dinghy. We've seen people use inflatable kayaks, and they're very good quality these days. And being inflatable, they're very easy to store away. The paddleboard that we had a really good pump system, so it was quite easy to inflate when we needed it. Things like exercise bands or a TRX system is great for maintaining your muscle. And my number one tip out of this is make sure you've got very, very good health insurance in case something happens. And that includes, particularly when you're overseas, the ability to be repatriated home if the worst should happen. So,
yeah. I did ask you that yesterday.
Yeah.
I asked if you didn't mind telling us who or which health insurance company you used.
Yeah, so we chose to use Topsail, and they have a Yachtsman's Gold policy, which is the one that we took. A lot of other health insurance or travel insurance policies may not necessarily cover sailing in the fine print, so you need to be very careful. And we found that one, which we bought from Australia, was very specifically, obviously, as the name suggests, to sailing.
Yeah.
So that's the one we used. All right, entertainment. 90% of our time is spent on anchor. 90% of cruises' time is spent on anchor. So you need to make sure that you have some things to do while you're having your downtime. So download ebooks on a Kindle or an iPad is a good idea. You can exchange books in marina libraries in Europe. That wasn't so easy because often the books were in foreign languages, but in Australia, I believe it's quite common and you can find some books there. We were able to use our streaming services and we had good internet, say in a marina. So I would download a couple of movies or a series or something, and then we could watch that while we were underway. Games and jigsaw puzzles, cards, if you're into that sort of thing. And also downloading books, podcasts, if you enjoy listening to them. And Audible Books was something that I found I used a lot on night watch because it was just easy to listen to. I could switch off if I needed to pay attention to the boat, and it wasn't actually distracting me from seeing what was going on around me when I was on watch. And it doesn't feel, it sounds silly, but you don't feel like you're quite alone. So I used to quite enjoy that on night watch.
Makes total sense, Suellen.
And I think the last point I had was around tourism. So obviously the excitement of traveling overseas or somewhere different is being able to explore the area that you're going in. So particularly in Europe when there's so much to see, as I said, take a break in a marina from time to time and just enjoy the local area and surroundings. And I think a lot of people make a point of doing that, but I just, you know, you need a break from the boat and it's a great way to see all those wonderful things. So walk or hire a car or motorbike, plan to do those things. You can get a lot of good advice from marinas on local tours and, you know, things like where to shop or where to go. So use them as a resource. Most places in Europe will speak good English. So we made a point of learning some of the local greetings just so that we could be a little bit friendly. And don't forget, you know, I'm sure you'll capture memories on your phone and your camera or your GoPro. We had a drone with us as well, which is where that photograph was taken in the beginning. The GoPro we kind of used to take underwater photographs. And I used to keep my phone with me. Scott would have his camera, his SLR camera with him. And by using all those things, we're able to capture all those different things in different ways. So, and if making videos is your thing, the GoPro is perfect for that.
Okay, so, sorry, I'll let you go there.
Okay. So before you actually get on the boat, just a few notes about arrangements before you leave, so that you have minimal worry about what's happening at home in terms of bills and things like that. Just remember to make plans to get your bills sent to you in a different way, electronically probably, and suspend your local health insurance while you have your overseas health insurance. Also arrange to have convenient access, remote access to funds, and have a backup plan in case there are problems with your card and your bank account. So if for some reason you lose your cards, you need to be able to make contact with your bank and make alternative arrangements. Just make sure you've got those things in place so it lowers the stress while you're away. And use your cruising and pilot guides to create a destination plan, but stay flexible. That's really important while you're cruising. And I'll leave you with a thought from Mark Twain, who said, 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than those you did. So throw off your bowlines, sail away from safe harbour, catch the wind in your sails, explore, dream and discover.
Very good. And then, Suellen, a couple of questions. Mm-hmm. So back to this point of it's all about living aboard. Can I ask a couple of, and this isn't, again, you said earlier, it's not about gender. I'm not doing it. It's just you and Scott were on the boat. What about things like laundry, keeping the boat clean? Did you have a routine?
We were fortunate enough to have a washing machine on board, which, can I tell you on that, it just made so much difference. We didn't have a washing machine on board on our monohull, Samea, and every time we went to a marina, I was spending a good half day just doing the laundry, you know, particularly big things like sheets or towels and, you know, loads of clothes. And then you'd spend the rest of the time hanging it out. Having the washing machine on board, the Helia, meant I could actually do the washing underway, or if I was in a marina, I could still be on the boat, do the laundry, hang it out on board, but still get on with other things that I wanted to do. So that, and a cleaning routine, not a routine so much, but we would obviously just try and keep things as clean as possible. As you get into a marina, the first thing you do is you get fresh water and you hose the boat down because of all the salt water on the deck. But we also had made the choice to have a high pressure freshwater pump on board, so we could hose out the saloon if we wanted to and not waste water. So there are a lot of conveniences on the Helia that we didn't have on the monohull that would just made things so much easier to live on board.
Okay, thank you. You've got another slide there?
No, it was just a thank you slide, actually.
Okay. So
thanks to everyone for listening and tuning in.
So that's been fantastic. And I know when it's been fantastic because all of a sudden we get lots of questions. So we just need to spend a couple of minutes, if it's all right, Suellen.
Yeah, that's great.
Popping through a few. We've got a question there from Hamish, who I know Hamish. his wife Anna are going off to Europe next year to do what you did, but on an Elba 45. And
okay.
again, very simple but important question. How did you manage your rubbish? Where did you keep it when you were on the boat as you were underway? How was it easy to dispose of? All that.
So again, we would dispose of our rubbish in marinas. If there was any organic stuff, we did tip it over the side when we were way offshore.
Yes.
The one thing that I did find when we shopped is we would have a lot of plastic waste. You know, you would buy just anything, cheese, or there was just, that's the one thing I noticed on the boat, is that we had a lot of plastic waste. So I guess what we tried to do is just compact it, make it as small as possible. Anything that might be smelly or dirty, I would rinse out before it went in a bin. And there's plenty of holding space away from you to store rubbish bags. So I don't believe we carried more than 2 or 3 bags that we would have to drop into a bin in a marina.
Understood. A question from early in the presentation when you were talking about electronics and devices. There was a question there. Did you ever use Google Earth on an open CPN?
No, no, we never needed Google Earth because the charts are pretty good in Europe, and it wasn't something that was on our radar when we went up to the Whitsundays, but it was in our planning. If we ever went to the South Pacific, a lot of people use Google Earth in South Pacific because the charting isn't as good as it is elsewhere. So I didn't use it personally, no, we didn't have any need to, but we would have looked into it going to the South Pacific.
Very good. And then Ian asked a question when we were on the page where we were talking about the boat stamp. And yes, Ian, I can answer. The picture that you saw on the page was effectively the picture of the stamp, the round stamp. It was obviously blown up a bit larger than the stamp is, Suellen, is that right?
Yes, the stamp's only about, I can't remember now, 3 centimetres across, I'd say.
Yes. Yeah, and in China, I lived in China and worked there. It was part of life, and they're called chops. You have to chop everything with your stamp. So I'm quite familiar with the old stamps. And then we asked about the pressure cooker. You answered that one. Is it possible, and this is a good question from Bennett, is it possible to live aboard a small boat? What are the important things needed to look for when buying a small liveaboard sailboat? There is an old answer for that, Bennett, about how long is a piece of string, but it's a good question because, Suellen, from your experience, you've done the monohulls, the multis. Yeah.
I guess it depends how small and how many of you are there. That is the how long is a piece of string kind of question.
Can I help maybe?
Yeah.
I also think it comes down to how much of an energy user you are. Obviously on the Helia 44 you had a gen set, you had your solar, you had obviously good battery bank. So it sounds to me you were living aboard on a boat where you were mostly always able to have access to your 230 volt power as well as all your 12 volt power. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I think to answer that question is, I think you could live aboard any boat. You just make the compromises for what you have. Like I know that we lived in a great deal of comfort in the Helia 44, and it made living life on board a lot easier. But with extra things on board comes greater complexity. Greater things can go wrong. You know, if you need to troubleshoot things that are not working. If you live on a smaller boat with simpler inclusions, then, you know, life becomes like a little bit simpler as well. If you don't have things like a water maker, or you might have to go ashore to fill up with water. If your fuel capacity isn't as high, you might have to go in and refuel more often. I think anything's possible. It's just what kind of compromise do you want to make, really?
Very good. And when you live,
let the size of the boat stop you if that's what you want to do, is what I'm trying to say.
I totally agree. And I've seen people over the years who, you know, living on smaller boats, because we lived on Hamilton Island and places like that. And you'd have people who happily lived on boats of all different shapes and sizes. You had the water maker on the Helia. Did you have a water maker on the monohull?
No, we did not.
And would you say that made a big difference?
Huge.
Yes.
Huge. It all comes down to self-sufficiency. So the solar panels on the Helia 44, the genset on the Helia 44, and the water maker were probably the things that made us, and the storage capacity, but all those things together made us very, very self-sufficient. We didn't have to go into a marina unless we wanted to.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Okay, and then there's no more questions. There's just some lovely thank yous from David and Liam and Arvind. So thank you all for passing on your gratitude. So generally people are saying that that you've just done a very good presentation, Suellen. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for listening, and I appreciate all the questions as well.
Oh, and I'm sorry, there is a couple of other questions I was on answered instead of opened. Going from a long time living aboard large ships and now looking to go on a monohull, do you have any recommendations of courses in Australia? So the idea is there any tuitions or schools or places that can help with that?
So I didn't hear the first part, Greg. What was the first part?
So it's from a gentleman Andrew, who's saying he's going from a long time living on board large ships.
Okay.
And he's now looking to go to a monohull to live aboard. Do you have any recommendations of courses in Australia?
It depends where he's based, I guess. I know it's the reason why I'm hesitating is it's changed a little bit. East Sail in Sydney used to do a lot of the courses, and I'm not sure they do that much anymore. So I couldn't answer that off the top of my head. But what I would suggest, though, is that if you're able to get on board a boat as a crew member, whether it's racing or just cruising, that gives you a lot of practical experience as well. And then you can add the courses on top of that. So things like all your safety at sea courses, they're all very, they're so important when you're going cruising. Is simple things that you don't think, like, do you know how to use a flare? Do you know what it's going to feel like when you jump off the boat? All those safety things are really important. All those cruises are offered at a lot of yacht clubs. Some of those courses are offered at yacht clubs. Navigation courses would be a good one to do as well, basic navigation. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head because I don't think East Sail do those courses, and the ones in Sydney are the only ones that I'm familiar with. Yeah,
understood. And look, sorry, the gentleman that asked that, I just moved the question, but if you wanted to email us or get in touch with us, we also have some suggestions of different schools and teaching establishments around Australia, so we can help with that. Now, listen, we've got a good question from Doug. He's just asked about how much refrigeration you had and the percentage breakdown between fridge versus freezer. And I think we did talk about this in our rehearsal yesterday, because we were talking about, you were saying how long you go, quite a long time, and you still had food left in your freezer.
Yeah. So on the Helia, we had two drawer fridges that stacked on top of one another. And then we had one freezer, which probably had a similar capacity to one of those drawers. The fridges and the freezers were probably by far, because we're fairly conservative with using electricity on board, those two were probably the most hungry things that we had on board in terms of electricity or power usage anyway. But we didn't have a problem with the solar panels or between the solar panels and the gen set. And as Greg mentioned, we stocked up the freezer when we were in France, quite full with all the lovely French pastries and stuff. And we still were using stuff a few weeks down the track. So we found the freezer particularly useful. Does that answer the question, Greg?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's with Fountaine Pajot, we're so fortunate. We have those two on just about every model. We have those two large drawer fridges.
They're brilliant.
Which my understanding is that the bottom, because the hot air rises and the cold air sinks, the bottom drawer is normally a little bit colder than the top drawer. And
that's
then
our drinks.
Yes, and then you've got the additional optional freezer, which is the wall opening freezer. Then on most of the models, you've also got the cockpit fridge. And then I know that Nod in the commissioning also offers for some people to put an additional bit of freezer, like 60 litres, up in the forepeak, access through the, if it's a Maestro owner's version. So we're again spoiled on the catamarans with space.
Yeah. And it depends how many people you're going to have on board and what your lifestyle is. With us, mostly being just the two of us, we didn't have needs for much more, extended refrigeration. But people who have large families or a lot of guests, they would probably need that extra refrigeration.
And then probably this is a question from your monohull days rather than your multi, because I think on the multi you could. Do you have any tricks for making beds that you can't walk around?
You know what? Invest in some fitted sheets that are custom made. I know it's like if your budget can afford it, it makes all the difference in the world to crawling around beds and making them. But no, not any special tricks apart from that. It's hard.
My only trick is, because this is from many years of running Sunsail, the yacht charter company up in Hamilton Island, is if you're making the beds, you always start at the end furthest away from you, so that you're on the mattress, and then you're bringing the sheet down so that your hot, sweaty body doesn't then mess it up straight after you've made it. So tuck it in at the furthest point away and then work back.
Yeah. and custom made fitted sheets, or if you can make them or if you can afford them, are great, particularly for the bottom sheet.
Well, there you go. So that is now all the questions answered, I believe. Rachel, just let me know if I've missed any. But lots of thank yous there, Suellen. So obviously you hit a good tune there today.
Thanks, everyone.
So I think on that note, we'll say thank you very much, and we'll wish everyone a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I hope everyone has a safe summer out on the water, wherever you may be, and that you all stay safe, and we'll tune in to show you the Allegria 67 at the end of January. And also, just another piece of breaking news is we had the presentation last night from Fountaine Pajot on the new model, the new 51, which is replacing the Saba. So you'll start seeing news and social media pieces about the new 51. So if you want to jump ahead of others and see that first, don't hesitate to give us an email or drop us a line. So thanks, Suellen. Great day. Thank you in the background, Rachel. And we'll sign off there, folks. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.